Okay, here we are back. Is it May 1st? May Day, I think. And we're discussing chapter 6, the Jupiter-Uranus cycle. A fun, exciting cycle after Saturn-Pluto. Does anyone want to jump in at some point and talk about kind of what they've been thinking about from this chapter?
Well, I've been talking about it all along. A couple sessions ago. I had suggested that things were going to be improving, and I had to go look up when the next Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is going to be, which will be the spring of 2024.
Yeah.
And that conjunction is actually one of the reasons why I suggest that things could improve. Certainly, Tarnis suggests that it could lead to a lot of scientific innovation. It's a very short period, but there very likely will be some very unusual things that come out of it.
Yeah, and the last one that we had was 2010 to 11, and people probably all recall that was a really a time of there was a lot of sudden upsurge of reformist mass movements that happened all of a sudden. The Uranus-Pluto square was just getting heated up too, but we had the Arab Spring in the early part of 2011, which kind of just like exploded all over the Middle East and parts of North Africa. And kind of tied into Occupy, which then happened a little bit closer to I think the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction had sort of passed 15 degrees, but there were some other interesting things, like the sun swung into, I think, alignment with Uranus, I think, when Occupy happened. But yeah, as we've seen from this chapter, there's a lot of unpredictability with this cycle, but it does tend to strike over and over with these moments of surprising breakthroughs for culture.
I think 2010-11 was also a year of, I felt like there was a lot going on culturally too. I felt like I was constantly going to shows. Maybe it was just because of like my age or whatever, but there were so many music venues in New York City and in San Francisco, and it felt like kind of there was like a cultural sort of peak at that time in terms of music and the arts.
I'm hearing like a cat, I think.
I
didn't really understand what the cat was saying, something about Jupiter and Uranus.
He was also born in 2010.
What are you saying? Okay. What were people making of all of these like correlations? So many of them seem to like strike from something happens in a conjunction, and then the next conjunction, it's almost like it is given this new impulse, sometimes in a new person, or a same person brings forward their next work, which tied right in with the previous one in the last conjunction.
Yeah, I really noticed how they sort of preamble that led into the Pluto-Uranus conjunctions. Also, if you compare the two, the Pluto-Uranus conjunctions seem to sort of happen afterwards, and Tarnis is definitely sort of making a connection between them, sort of the Uranus-Jupiter ones sort of presaging a lot of the change of ideas that occurs in the later periods. They actually turn into movements during the Uranus-Pluto periods, whereas the sort of ideas that spark a lot of that movement sort of occurs during these Uranus-Jupiter cycles, it seems.
Yeah, that seems definitely to be the case.
One thing I've noticed is that in 1954 and 55, there were people like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, and there were some others, but I'm those are the two I'm remembering right now. But they certainly fit that symbolism.
They were born in those years. I mean,
Yeah, and so that's all it stood out for me in that sequence. But
Pia or Kitty or Jennifer, what are some things like popping out for you from this past chapter?
Well, I will say personally that I'm probably going to not be as vocal as I normally would be because I'm a little behind. I didn't realize till yesterday that you guys were meeting today. And also my group is like a week behind you guys, but so I'm like 19 pages in. But it's still kind of fascinating and like makes sense in terms of Jupiter kind of like empowering things and making them more visible. Be sort of like it's almost like an announcement or a herald of like some kind of energy that's coming into being. And it's fascinating, how it happens on technological levels and cultural levels, and then also like talking about peak experiences. And also a lot of this in an interesting way, similar to the Saturn Pluto chapter, I'm actually making a lot of connections with my personal life and past relationships that fell apart because a lot of them coincided with these movements. And it's so it's like a almost like a a depersonalization of the events that happened and realizing that there was this energy happening that caused me to do X, Y, and Z. Not that I'm abdicating anything, but that the time where I got excited and might have made certain decisions, it was because there was this energy of excitement in the air. There was something from within that wanted me to expand and explore and maybe take a lot more risks than I would do as a normally like very earthy, like not impulsive person. So it's really interesting to consider about Jupiter and Uranus meeting up in Aries, and then the following, that kicking off the Uranus Pluto, and then everything that kind of happened in my personal life during that period of time to kind of reflect back on it. And also innovations and ideas that kind of things spiritually and in terms of energetic practices I learned and stuff like that that have stuck with me for the past 10 or 12 years. So there's been a lot that I've learned from that too.
Yeah, Pia.
I'll volunteer my thoughts. I'm still stumbling over the astrology. This is a new language for me. But as I was reading it, I was encouraged and liked the way Tarnis was talking about how nothing is lost. And I was thinking about spiral dynamics. I don't know about the evolution of our consciousness over time, and the way an embryo never loses what came before, but just builds upon it. And I thought that was really encouraging because for me, when I think of these archetypal planetary movements that do have, for me, a tendency of being, I know he says they're synchronistic and not deterministic, but there's this desire in a way when you're reading about it to say, oh, wow, here we are in this conjunction and or alignment, and this is going to happen. It's a tendency I have anyway when I'm reading it to think that there is so strong a correlation that those alignments have inevitable consequences rather than probable consequences. So that was something that I was thinking about, was Beck and spiral dynamics, and also Ken Wilber, who also talks about the evolution of the soul. And that made me feel very encouraged, because he talks about these axial awakenings and how there are these huge changes in human consciousness. And my background is in cultural anthropology, and the movement of the human being towards a better integration and a better wholeness is, at least what I was studying when I was doing depth psychology, is what individuation is for. And looking at it archetypally on the larger scale, from a planetary scale or the great human drama, when he talks about all these wonderful artists and how they are talking about the human drama, from Shakespeare to Nietzsche and so on and so forth, whether it's in music or it's in literature or it's in the scientific discoveries or psychology, it's all as if there's this great wave and desire that the cosmos itself is asking us to become whole and to participate. And he does talk about co-creative energies. And I think that's part of this cycle, is the co-creative desire to participate in the cosmos. So those are things I'm still stumbling over the astrology. It's complicated. For me, it's like learning mathematics, which I struggled with in school, So I go for metaphorical understanding more than exact understanding. And it may always be that way. I may never be able to get my hands wrapped around this. I don't think I could ever put an engine back together either. Maybe if I worked hard enough at it, but so those were my thoughts. It's a really good book, by the way, Spiral Dynamics.
Bio,
Spiral.
Spiral dynamics.
spiral dynamics. Okay. I thought you said some wonderful things there.
No, thank you.
No.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
When I was reading this chapter, it brought to mind, when I was in school, I was an older student. I was a single parent. And one of the classes I took was film and literature. And one of the movies we were watching was Midnight Cowboy, which was a sensational hit at the time. It was pretty bold, as a lot of movies were back then, but there was a younger student, probably just out of high school, and he was just kind of railed about how he didn't get it. He thought it was so stupid, and people were just hedonistic and selfish, and all they did was party, and there was nothing good about it. And I just felt at a loss for words, because it made me feel this generational difference, and I didn't know how to explain what it was like at that time, because I was, boomer. I graduated high school in 1969, so I remember watching the moon landing, and a lot of what he was talking about in the creativity, besides literature, was also, for me, the whole thing was about the music. The music just was fabulous. It just carried you on this wave of energy. Like Jennifer was saying, you just kind of got swept along, and it was really a peak experience, and it was very positive and uplifting, and you had no fears for the future. And maybe we were also a little blinded because there were a lot of bad things too. There was still the civil rights era going on, and the Vietnam War. But overall, it was a great surge of hope. It was almost like you could feel the energy in the air. It was like crackling at times. It was just an amazing, and I couldn't even put it in words that this younger student would understand. But, I'm happy to have experienced it, because it kind of gives you hope for the future too, knowing that we can return to that. And now I'm really looking forward to the new innovation. And who was it? Was it Kyle or Nathan mentioned the conjunction in spring of 2024 and how you're anticipating some scientific innovations? And I just was thinking about, I wonder if this whole Twitter thing is going to take off with Elon Musk, if it's actually going to turn into something positive, who knows, you know? I see Genevieve laughing.
Yeah.
I'm scared.
Yeah, I am too, a little bit, actually. Could go either way.
Does make some interesting points too, though, about what has happened to the human being. I think I underlined practically the whole page about what has happened since the development of the World Wide Web and the cell phone and multitasking, and what has happened to sort of flatten human communication, where I can be having a conversation, all of you are in different places around the planet. Meanwhile, my dogs are running around down here, my children are in, that our exact interactions have been diluted by this wonderful gift of this expansion, this Jupiter, I guess, expansion of communication, but it does have consequences. And when I was a teacher, when I was teaching Montessori school, there was a great debate about whether or not we would even allow computers in the classroom. And that's not even that long ago. Now they're indispensable. And we had maps of what happens neurologically to the brain. And the thumb, which is an extremely important part of our anatomy, has taken over more and more space within the neurological, neurons that fire together, wire together. So they're taking on more and more space, and our ability to have immediate interactions on a one-on-one level are diminishing for children. And when I go to a restaurant, because we can now go to restaurants again, and I see a 3-year-old with a little, a little pad, and they're playing at 3 years old, they're playing a game of put the ball in the basket, or whatever it is that you do, or make the rabbit go around the house, or I don't know what a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old's digital environment is, but the parents are not talking to this child. The child is interacting with a flat dimensional space that isn't real. It is not immediate. And that does have consequences for our ability to empathize, to communicate, to read each other's facial language. I mean, it was bad enough when we were all like this, and you couldn't even see a person smile or frown or whatever. You had to really rely on eyes. And I think it's this, I think he uses the word Damocles sword. It could go either way. It really, it's got the great capacity. We've got the entire archives of Tibet, or you can take any class at Harvard now if you want. You won't get credit for it, but it's accessible. That's a miracle. We really do. It's incredible. You can live in anywhere and have access, if you have access to the internet, to just about anything. But at the same time, we're losing connection and community, And when we talk about, and he has that at the end of the chapter, the differences between the 60s and the 90s. And they're really quite, I want to read that part of the book, that chapter again, because they're really quite marked. I've had the privilege, and most of us have had the privilege of living through both of those chapters, the 60s and the 90s. And they are very different. And the big difference is technology. What happened with technology? So I don't know what will happen.
Yeah.
I don't know what will happen.
Well, first thing, I share, Pia, your concern. I'm on the same page with this concern about how we've, to a great extent, and lost a kind of physical connection, and immediacy, and especially for children who are sort of totally come in with this kind of total innocence, and if they have not been given the chance to explore the world in a certain physical way, then they don't necessarily know what they're missing by not having that. And that is scary, because then we're going to see what happens. It's like a lab case right now. Humanity's never had this type of situation before. One thing though, I think seems like you've read the next chapter, because this is what he looks at in the next chapter with Uranus and Neptune, the big conjunction of the 80s and 90s. And then he compares that to the Uranus.
Are we not on chapter 7?
No, we just read 6, Jupiter-Uranus. But you're getting us a nice preview.
Really got into chapter 7. I should go away. I'm sorry. I'm
Anyone
sorry.
wanna
I
jump
thought we were
ahead?
on chapter 7.
Oh no. I agree. I
Let
think
me flip
it's a
that.
fascinating comparison, but just so anyone else is like a little bit baffled, he gets it to it in the next chapter.
I'm so
Um,
sorry.
That's okay. We
I
You
didn't
can be
mean to go
previews
to-
of coming
it's
attractions.
kind of like it's a very Uranus Neptune
I
thing to
just
just like
assumed I
jump
hadn't
in
gotten there
time
yet.
to a new chapter without like actually being in that chapter.
I'm so sorry.
It all ties together though.
Hey, Jennifer, is
It
this in
does.
my chart? This
Oh,
tendency
that-
to jump ahead and get obsessive?
Yeah.
It could be that Saturn and
It is
Sagittarius.
fascinating in the next chapter. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, you can look forward to the next chapter.
Yeah. You're winning right now in the reading contest.
Yeah.
Except for you,
I think-
Tim.
It's
So-
really
I
like to
grabbed
run it 3
me. I
times.
mean, this book has really grabbed me, and I came across an audio, a radio program of an interview from years and years and years ago. And if I can, I'll post it. I'm not having much luck at doing that. But it's Richard Tarnis talking to another astrologer about his writing of this book and his great passion for writing this book, which took up 30 years of his life, and all the people, the amazing people he had the privilege of working with. Gregory Bateson, oh my goodness, and just on and on and on. He just has had the privilege when he was at Esalen of working with some incredible minds while he was investigating these patterns and the patterns of humanity. And he talks about it, maybe it's chapter 6, I'm sorry. I think it's in chapter 6 where he talks where they did, or maybe it was in the interview I was listening to, but they were doing Perestroika 2 or something like that at Esalen when we were having the Cold War, and Brezhnev actually came to Esalen to sit in the hot tub naked to talk, politics when we were still trying to come to some sort of an
Definitely not in the book.
understanding.
Not in the book. I would have remembered Brezhnev naked in a hot tub.
What he was saying is it's really hard to carry on a stance of war when you're, eating vegetarian out at Esalen and you're in the hot tub naked with somebody, that the whole mask has to fall. And I thought that was really fascinating too. And that was part of that epoch. I can't tell you which alignment that was. Maybe it was the Uranus. Sounds like it.
Almost reminds me of Wilhelm Reich's ideas, which were big in the 60s and 70s, about just like how sexual repression and different kinds of physical repression give us fascism and things like that.
Yes, well, look at the Catholic Church, and I was raised Catholic, I don't think it's a healthy thing biologically. I don't know about spiritually. But anyway, Richard Tarnis has this in a way, his Passion of the Western Mind is required reading for its historical content. I think this should be required reading.
Yes.
I really do, because it covers so much about the human spirit and psyche, not just accomplishments, which the Passion of the Western Mind sort of focuses in on, big chapters of wars and conquests, that's what history sort of is the documentation of a different side of humanity, even if you're talking about achievements in art and literature and so on. The way he focuses this is so much more alive to me, because he's talking about the human passion, the human frailties, the human, mess ups, and human potential.
What struck me I forgot which passage it was in chapter 6 too, where he was collecting all this data, and he started out as a skeptic and he was learning astrology, and there was somewhere where he was talking about when I was trying to imagine what it must have felt like for him. Like, did he suddenly just lose his breath or take a deep breath when it dawned on him that this stuff was lining up and making sense? I'd like to have been a fly on the wall to see his reaction when this sort of came over him, the realization that what he was studying was actually, the correlations were there. How incredible that must have been. I'll talk about peak experience,
Yeah, and then he lived, a lot of it was, he then lived lived through the 80s and saw a number of, saw what was occurring, lived through the Great Opposition, I believe it was in 89, 90, and saw all the incredible
Yeah.
momentous historical things that happened and so on. So he was seeing it retroactively, but also seeing it in real time. One thing, and then in this chapter, he does get a little bit into, I think at the very end, especially about how often we don't know what has really occurred in a conjunction if we're in the midst of it, because some of these things need hindsight. Some of them need decades. Some of them need a century or more. Even like Copernicus's great discoveries took, you could say, 100 years or more to get validated in any real way. So that does give me hope. I feel like I don't know, the cream can rise eventually, and I feel like this is going to rise and rise, this book, as people have a chance to see that he not only presented a new vision of how to understand our past, but he's also laid out a way to see what can come after the book. And it's been lining up since then as well. So agreeing with what Pia said, I feel like it's a book that I just wish people would contend with it at least. You can, you can be adversarial against it, but I wish people would just try to read it.
I posted in the chat box the name of the interview. Everybody who's interested will have to just research if you can find this radio interview, but it is fascinating and it's in 2 parts. So
Yeah,
it's there in the chat box.
I don't see it in the group.
I don't see it. I just see myself.
Maybe I didn't hit send. It says to everybody.
Or you might have hit like a name instead of everybody.
No, it says to everybody. Oh, I have to hit enter.
There you go. Got it.
There it is.
I still read paper copy. I'm not good with this.
Same here, same here.
I think in the kind of related to what you both were saying, Pia and Tim, that like people being born in and Kyle about like Steve Jobs being born during one of the cycles. I think that the generations that are being raised now by people who are influenced by this by this book and by these perspectives will also the fruits of those labors like influencing those generations will also not be really manifested or seen until many decades from now. So I think that's something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah. I feel strongly the seeds have been planted. I was talking to my son who is 33 this morning, who we've been having the most amazing conversations lately. And of late, it was about music and the music that I grew up with in the 60s and the 70s that I still feel very passionately about, but I'm not technologically inclined. And he has started buying vinyl records again and asked me where all my vinyl records went. And I got rid of them all, which is really too bad. It's really too bad. So now he's searching for the same albums that I had for years and years and years and years. But he introduced me to Spotify today. And he put me on his family plan. So now I can hear all my greats, because I'm on his family plan. And that's sort of a comical thing, but it's the seeds were planted. And we were also talking about philosophy. And he went off to meditation class this morning. And I'm just in agreement with you. The seeds were planted, and not even deliberately. They just like the ripple when you drop a pebble in, it just sort of flowed on its own, and are now part of his consciousness, and not genetically, or maybe genetically. Who knows what gets passed on in the DNA? Because it's not a conversation that we actually had before. So I feel encouraged. I was so down a couple weeks ago. And I don't know if it was the cosmos or if it was just the end of winter and the end of COVID and so on, but I did not feel a sense of hope about anything. And I feel very positive reading the, sorry, but chapter 7 and having these conversations with my grown children about the things that I have been able to pass on to them that I was not aware I was passing on, just by being me in the house. And I think that's kind of cool, personally. And they have passed on to me too, things.
When is the next when are the next conjunction and oppositions? Exactly.
Of Jupiter-Uranus.
Yeah.
As Nathan said, around 2024 is Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. So that would
Yeah,
be
in the spring.
the new moon of that cycle. I can open up the Archetypal Explorer thing to look at the next opposition if you want to see.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Yeah.
Let me see.
I can also share a file, I think. Let me see if I
start with
can
a
pull it up.
screen. Let me see. You can all see this?
Oh, there you go.
You can see this, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So
That's
I'll
great.
take out the trine and I'll take out the other planets. Well, here we are at this line. If you want to take out the squares too, just so we see the axials for a minute. There was an opposition. I know there's a lot of things in the planetary aspects that were going on. There were some, probably many of us feel this was a dark time. There was a lot of things going on. It was also a time of a lot of major protests and
Right.
Women's March and Me Too and some other things. Here is the conjunction of the Arab Spring, and Occupy starts right at the end of it, and many other things. This is like the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and I think gay marriage got maybe passed through federally here, I believe. So a lot of the breakthroughs that we've seen this cycle having, major moments with, like Stonewall, going back to the conjunction of the late 60s. Anyways, looking forward, here's the conjunction coming up. The next opposition is here in 2031.
Really big.
It looks a little bit longer than well, they're usually about 14 months, I guess. This is
And that's
this is the retrograde motion when it goes
right.
down. And we kind of have peeked ahead at some of the other things, but there's some major outer planet stuff. If we bring in the other outer planets, that starts happening in the 2030s and 40s, especially. But if we're just looking at this cycle, these are the next two. Did we want to look at any other things or things that we read in the chapter where we just want to see the visuals of how the waveforms interact? Like some of these, I don't know. You can just tell me if you want to see any other thing. Like the Uranus-Pluto interacting with Jupiter-Uranus that is happening.
Yeah, let's take a look at it.
Do you want to see the 60s or the 1850s conjunction?
I'm curious about the older conjunctions. I feel like we've talked a lot about
Okay.
the 60s movements.
We can go to like when Nietzsche was born, because that got a lot of time in the end of the chapter.
Mm.
So he's born right in here. I don't know the month, I don't remember, but 1844 at this conjunction. And here we see there's an opposition in the early 1850s. There's also a Saturn alignment here with Uranus and Pluto. And then this is the next conjunction. This is where Darwin and Wallace have their kind of synchronic letter exchange within 2 days of like Abraham Lincoln getting the nomination for senator and the Lincoln-Douglas debates and other things that Tarnis talked about. Wagner's Tristan and Isolde, the Fleur de Mal, and other things here. If we bring in Pluto, we're only looking at 10 degrees. Maybe we'll go to 15. If you bring in the squares also, he didn't talk about this square, but this was the major revolutionary period in Europe, especially. It was like, I think the moment of maximum revolution in the 19th century were these 1848 revolutions. And this occurred at a square, very exact. It's showing you two cycles here. It's showing you Jupiter-Uranus square and Jupiter-Pluto square. So Jupiter was squaring the two, or sorry, Jupiter was squaring the two. And then Saturn was in a big moment here in the early 1850s also. And there's some phenomena that Tarnis talked about here, complicating the period, and making it, bringing in some more challenging elements.
Thank you. This is helpful to see. I mean, especially this like more complex interaction. I'm curious. I mean, he didn't really talk about squares at all. So like, I'm wondering whether if we just eliminate the oppositions and conjunctions, like what that looks like, and if there are things that I don't know.
Yeah, you want to look at Pia's unmuted, and do you want to look at this period or bring it
You
into
could
more
probably
recent
mute her.
times? Oh, I can ask to mute her. Can I? Oh, can I mute her? Oh, I just muted her.
I've had to do that. And
I have a lot of power here. I didn't know that. Genevieve, did you want to look at a more recent time for the squares?
Sure. Yeah.
Like recent?
Yeah, maybe like the past. Yeah, that's great. 19 to present, maybe
90 to the
90s
present.
to present. Yeah.
Yeah, so we just had the square. I mean, honestly, you know, when he's talking about the Jupiter-Uranus cycle, I think politically we're talking a lot about things on the left and progressive things. But there's many things in the sky, but I did also feel like, honestly, the attempted, whatever you want to call it, coup or insurrection at the Capitol, it did remind me of things like the storming of the Bastille and occupations of 68, 69. It was a very different side of the coin, if you will like. But I felt like this kind of almost like daredevil quality of like, it's got to be now, it's got to be revolution, and we just got to like make this thing happen no matter what. That did remind me of these other moments of Jupiter-Uranus major alignments. Because here's when January 6th happened.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's
right.
also been a lot of labor
But
movement as
Saturn,
well.
Saturn would have been involved then too, right?
Oh yeah, I mean the picture is always more
Because
complicated.
that would make it more conservative.
Yeah.
I would tend to think if Saturn is also involved in addition, like which could have something to do with that.
Yeah, here's where is it? Where is the set? Oh, we took out the conjunctions. There it is. Yeah, that was still pretty big. There's the conjunction of Saturn and Pluto, which peaked right when COVID erupted, but was still pretty big then. And Mars was in the picture. And
But if Saturn was squaring Uranus and also Jupiter.
Yeah, I can, I'm gonna try to do one other thing here. Let me just get a little bit fancy and see if I can.
Like, can you do Saturn, Uranus, Jupiter?
Oh,
Just
sorry. Saturn, Uranus, and Jupiter, just those three?
Like around the time that you mentioned, I'm just curious.
Around the January 6th?
Yeah.
Yeah, you had the square of Jupiter and Uranus, the conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter, and then this is going to be Saturn, Uranus. I could also, though, one sec.
So it looks like they do overlap. So like maybe that would give like you were saying, like similar to.
I'm going to try one thing.
Just like more conservative flavor of storming going on because of Saturn.
Yeah. Anyway, I can bring that back up if you wanted to look at another Genevieve or anyone else. Did you want to see another period for these cycles or for the Jupiter-Uranus cycle? Or are we good?
I think this is helpful. I mean,
Yeah.
Does anybody else have a request? You're like archetypal explorer DJ.
I also just got a program called Ephemeris that does really nice, just more the natal chart imagery. I can also try to open that, but
Ephemeris?
it's called Ephemeris.
Instead of ephemeris. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Why? Is it like for iPhone or something?
No, I don't even have an iPhone actually. Just
That's
explain
just
why I'm
interesting
with
that they would call it that. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Maybe we can reroute this back to chapter 6. Any other major thoughts that people had. I wonder if anyone's ever, I haven't heard like devil's advocates or any naysaying really, but are people feeling like overall that the evidence is pretty overwhelmingly in favor of what Tarnis is getting at, or are some people still feeling like, well, I'm not sure?
I think we're all true believers here.
I'm a Tarnis groupie myself.
That's what I figured, but yeah.
I think my only main criticism is that I wish that there was more more discussion or more inclusion of non-Western or like non-white cultural contributors and scientific contributors. It's very, I mean, I know that that's his specialty, but I hope, maybe, people can reach out to him about this, that he could sort of explore this like further in other areas of the world and like how it applies more globally than just in these more Eurocentric ways. Because I think that would provide a much more complex perspective on how different dynamics are at play at different places in the world and through different cultures, and how these archetypes are manifested in non-Western cultures and societies.
Genevieve, did you see Changing of the Gods? Just out of
No,
curiosity.
not yet. I'm waiting until after the book club.
I think you would enjoy it because I think he made an attempt to do that. While it's still based on Tarnis's work,
Yeah.
like they include more different cultural voices in the conversation. So I think you would appreciate that, because I had another friend who kind of felt the same way, and she resonated a lot more with Changing of the Gods for that reason.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Saving
Yeah,
it.
I think they did too. I think it would be really interesting to see that, and I'm sure he has colleagues across the globe, different astrologers from different cultures, and that would be a really interesting study actually to compare notes, and I think that's going to probably happen eventually.
Yeah, I
know.
also imagine that probably at CIAS there are students doing this work as well, or students of his or whatever, who are interested in taking things maybe one at a time, like how these things manifest in Latin America or etc. I think it could be a really cool dissertation.
Yeah.
If someone were to do that.
Yeah, there was actually a very important book that was published just last year or something. I wish I could remember the title of it right off the top of my head, but it was about post-colonialism and astrology. It was written by an author whose name is Alice Sparkly Cat.
Yeah.
And, she talked a lot about the concerns of, sort of opening the doors for people of color to speak and present ideas within the astrology community. I saw or listened to an interview with Chris Brennan with Alice Barkley Cat about the book, and it's a very important book, and I hope to see more of that sort of thing coming from younger astrologers. I think it's on the horizon, and certainly, by 2024, we might start seeing more of that, hopefully.
Yeah, maybe these are the hidden births that are going to emerge.
There you go. Yeah.
This is just a small aside, but I was really surprised. I subscribe to The Nation magazine, which is political, and
Right.
usually I wouldn't think that they would touch something like astrology. They actually had a Q&A at the back of one of the issues with Alice Sparkly Cat. Maybe
Really?
it's because she's leftist and she's talking about a lot of things that politically are of the moment on the left. Yeah, I was like surprised. I thought almost felt like I should write to them and thank them for including a different kind of perspective on what's happening in the world.
I used to have a subscription to The Nation, and they're actually published here at Madison, Wisconsin. They've been around for years. They're very liberal, yeah. But that's interesting. I'll have to find that issue.
I think it's also probably difficult because of colonialism, a lot of historical records have been lost. And so I
Yeah.
wonder if like the next step is to make more of an effort in finding those documents, because I can imagine that it's much easier to find like the birth date of these Western influential people than it is to find that kind of information from somebody who
Yeah.
comes from a culture that didn't necessarily take specific information about their birth date and time.
Yeah, it's going to be more complicated. Tarnis even says like the historical record for the West gets radically attenuated once you go back earlier than 1500.
Right.
And then for other parts of the world, some of them are largely oral traditions or don't keep the written records the way that we have kept them for centuries. So yeah,
There was
lots
so
of-
much that was destroyed too, like with the Spanish, you know, and the Aztecs and the Mayan cultures, and with oral culture, like I'm Oneida, and we have, and it's not just Oneida, it's across the globe. There are communities, the different indigenous communities who are losing a lot of their culture because their elders are dying off. And a lot of that is transmitted through the language, and the languages are dying. So that's becoming a real hot issue too.
Yeah, that's, I mean, I'm curious. I haven't dug into this that much. I know that a lot of people probably have, but like the intersection between the Mayan calendar and the like the Western calendar, and how I don't know what the cycles look like if you compare them and analyze those archetypes as well, like the Mayan archetypes. I wonder if there's a lot of similarity or some alignment.
Yeah.
The culture is, sorry,
No, go ahead. I don't know that much
I-
about the calendar, that's for sure.
I've actually studied it. So
Ah.
the symbolism is very different. It has a lot to do with the Mayan culture from the classical period, which would be the 1st century after Christ's birth, basically, to about 1000 AD. So the cycles for the spiritual, they actually have several different calendars that are known and recognized. And some are more agricultural minded. The one that you usually hear referred to as the Mayan calendar is a spiritual calendar of 260 days. And it doesn't actually cycle through on a tropical sequence. It actually is sort of, it has days that reoccur 3 times a year, you know, on different years. It's kind of hard to describe. It's a very unique sort of system. I've tried to research as much as I can about what is known about the astrology, but there isn't much published. So it's kind of difficult to really learn about it directly. But it's an interesting system. They definitely followed their own astrology. I mean, there have been paintings and inscriptions found that actually refer to people consulting charts and consulting priests, and it was a fairly complex society, and you know, the people who live in Central America today still practice many of the different religious practices related to the calendar, counting the days of the calendar, you know, divination practices. It's really a fascinating subject. I could probably go on and on about it if you let me.
You should write something.
Mhm.
I tried for a while. I was actually going to write a calendar. This was back when the calendar was changing over in 20, what was it, 2010? I forget now. It never went anywhere, so I might return to it.
Yeah, I know Tarnis also references other cultures in terms of the archetypes, you know, what like the Promethean Pluto energy with I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Quetzalcoatl, and Aztec culture, and Shiva in Indian culture. And then there's, you know, there's the serpents, the different symbology. There's like the serpents in Central America, and what's the other one? Jaguar. The jaguar is a big symbol too, I know.
Yeah, actually, there's a certain idea about the Milky Way being something of a serpent, being depicted as a serpent. So there are certain depictions in Aztec and Mayan cultures of serpents that refer directly to the Milky Way in the sky. So I'm not very schooled in the actual archaeology, but it's an interesting subject to explore, certainly. Yeah.
Kyle looks like he's talking, but we can't hear him.
Yeah. Probably need to turn up the volume.
Oh yeah, he is trying to talk. No, we're not hearing you.
Something happened to the mic.
While we're working on that, before, you know, anything, I don't know. Should we wait for Kyle? Kyle, come back. Okay. You can always text and write a message and we'll
Yeah.
broadcast it. Are there certain big themes that we haven't talked about from the chapter yet that people wanted to talk about?
I think the only thing that I kind of, well, I've seen this in every chapter, but I feel like there's he always brings in this sort of concept of balance. This one was interesting because I felt like it was as these often come on the heels of like a dark period or in relation to some dark period. I guess he kind of talks about it as an interaction between like sort of like a reaction, like the emergence and expansion as a reaction to dark things happening. And I don't know, I don't really have a comment on it, but I appreciate that that's sort of like a common thread. Oh, yay.
Can anybody hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
I can hear you, Kyle.
No. Oh, wow.
But yeah, I think that
God.
it's something that is important to bring in consideration of all these different cycles. But especially maybe Kitty, this gets to what you were talking
I
about.
guess I'm done.
I
guess I'm done.
Can you not hear us? Can Kyle hear us?
Thank you.
Aw.
We can hear you now,
switched.
Kyle.
Now we can hear you, but you can't hear us. Okay, I'm gonna have to mute him, I think, in a minute if he can't hear us. And
You can hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
we
we
can
can.
hear
can you
you.
hear us?
Well, I can't hear you. That's hilarious. Hello?
Hello.
Loud and clear. I'll type that.
Oh,
Type that message.
Oh, wow. Gee, this thing is weird.
Maybe he should just go ahead and speak whatever it is he wants to say.
I
Oh, yeah.
know.
Put
I
that in
was-
the chat.
I was just gonna try to go back to what Tim was sort of starting this thread with, which was, is this convincing, right?
Hmm.
Is the evidence that he presents convincing? And I would say that it's quite convincing to me, because it's really the only thing like, there's nothing else like this, right? I mean, there's nothing else in our experience in the world that allows us to explore the time dimension in anything like this way. In reference to a physical system of some sort, right? So that in itself is totally unique in all the world, as far as I know. And there are certain people who are really interested in astrology being a science, and those people, at least one of those people I talked to was disappointed. He expressed disappointment in this book because it wasn't proving anything, right? So this is something that comes up a lot for some people. And the problem is that there's really nothing to compare this to. I mean, you could say, well, all these events, maybe they're just sort of randomly distributed, but it just looks like they're following the planets, right? I don't think there is. I think it is beyond the capability of the current level of evolution of research methodology, et cetera, et cetera. There's absolutely no way that this can be proven or disproven, and the mentality that desires proof and the lusts after proof is very, very different. So I'm convinced, and I think just even if somebody some alien, I don't know, alien intelligence or something that was 100 times smarter than we are could analyze all these things. It would not matter to me, because it's just the nature of the beast that these are the physical and cultural correlations that we see, and the information is just right there on the surface for us to appreciate. So second guessing that is a fool's project. That's my take on it. Of course, that's not a scientist speaking exactly. Somebody with a scientific background like me that doesn't buy everything. So
Yeah, I think, didn't Genevieve, did you mention in like one of the first talks about wondering if and when like there would be a moment And something like this archetypal astrological perspective would sort of like have a inflection point. I'm trying to think of what, I feel like you said something that was wondering like what would be that thing that would cause it to click, maybe in the way, or if you didn't, then I'll just speak it myself. But thinking about like going back again to Copernicus, though it took a massive amount of time for his and then later Kepler's and Galileo's insights to be finally assimilated and agreed with, it took a century at least, really. There was a way in which it could be sort of proven to the extent that we can prove anything. And we can now, of course, leave the Earth and look back on the Earth and see certain things about our world. And you can see the planet's relationship to the sun in a very obvious way. But to what Kyle's saying, I also don't know if we can really ever fully prove or disprove what we're reading about here in any final sense. I mean, I'm just not expecting a 100% proof or disproof, but I think the fact that we can't disprove it also is something that we need to remind people of, as well as the fact that we can't necessarily prove it in a complete sense. It's about a more nuanced look at what's going on. And I think Tarnis tries to like lay that out a bit more in the beginning chapters, saying that, you know, he takes pains to say like, well, you're having to use a lot of your faculties. It's not just looking at sort of data. It's using other sensibilities, other perceptiveness, subtle senses, and recognizing patterns and synchronicities. But that's different than like an absolute ability to prove something.
But I think that that's, I mean, you could say that about a lot of different technological or like things that have become more easy to prove that at one time were more elusive, like weather patterns and like things that are more easily trackable. The technology to make it easier to track these things emerged at a time that was sort of in keeping with the cycles of all these things. And so maybe we'll reach a time when like these less tangible cycles or like more psychological or I don't know if the metaphysical is the correct word, but less tangible cycles are more easily traceable.
Yeah, I've actually thought of the weather analogy too, in that we have like an annual cycle. We know the Earth goes around the sun, and that once a year, wherever we're located on Earth, certain patterns recur. They're not like, if we take like where Genevieve and I live in New York City, if we're looking at like January 15th of any given year, we know like there's a certain chance there might be snow and people wearing coats, and maybe there won't be leaves on the trees, and like certain things will be occurring. So people might have colds and things like that. We're almost living, this is how I sort of look at these cycles and how most people are living unaware of these realities. It's almost as if we're living, not realizing that it's January 15th again in the cycles that we're in the planetary cycles. For instance, Saturn and Pluto will be in a conjunction, and no one seems to be aware that they're in a conjunction, and certain things are recurring. And they're like, it's almost like the analogy of it's January, we didn't realize we should be wearing a coat, and we're going to might maybe have a more likelihood of having a cold. It's not 100% sure that it's going to be like 26 degrees and I'm going to get frostbite, but like it's going to feel different than like a certain other time of the year. And that does feel like so that's sort of how I've begun to think about the way in which most people are completely unaware of these cycles. It's almost like not knowing what the season is for your given location.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the seasons are more granular as far as interpreting or defining what they are, certainly. You know, you can talk about Uranus, Jupiter, and you can talk about Uranus, Pluto, you know, but if you try to talk to the average person on the street, they're not going to know what you're talking about, you know?
Yeah. It makes me wonder what it would be like to I don't know, do an astrological analysis from the perspective of a different planet, and like what like, I don't know, I guess you could use maybe our explorations of different planets as like some kind of guiding event timeline, but like what was going on with the alignments from the point of that planet that made us like, that drew one of our satellite, you know, like drones or whatever to you know, arrive on that planet.
That's
It's-
exactly what my son said this morning. He said, what would it be like to a Venusian? Because I showed him that lineup that I posted and he goes, it's not going to look the same from up there.
Yeah, I know. Nothing does.
Everything's always cloudy on Venus, I
That's-
think. Right.
Sounds like a bad astrological forecast for someone.
Yeah. Has anybody ever read like this classic Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein? It's a science fiction classic. And it was my first really exposure to, there was a character in the book who was an astrologer. And it was about the book, the main character was a man who was born on Mars. And so the astrologer actually had to do a chart that was a Mars, you know, a Mars-centric chart, right? Which is still, I don't think there's really any astrological software out there that does stuff like that, but I might be wrong. But anyway, and that was in 1969 or 8.
I have
So-
to read that book. I've been meaning to read that book for a long time.
And you've taken us back to the triple conjunction. It was also reminding me of like subtle, there are like subtle things that I find interesting sometimes, like this can tie it back into Nietzsche. And we looked at, for those of us that got to the end of the chapter, how these Jupiter-Uranus cycles tend to like, Nietzsche being born at a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction at the start of a Uranus-Pluto conjunction. It's a complicated interaction between these two cycles and Nietzsche, and then the writing of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and then Richard Strauss, I don't know if I'm saying that right, his composition, which then happens at essentially the identical moment at the beginning of the subsequent Uranus-Pluto opposition. Tarnis didn't note, again, the squares, but Stanley Kubrick is then born at a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction at, again, the start of the next square in 1928. And then Kubrick uses also Sprach Zarathustra prominently in 2001: A Space Odyssey in 1968. But that also in that movie, it occurs to me like that movie is about going to Jupiter and beyond the infinite. And I feel like that's a perfect like metaphor for like what was happening in the culture at that moment in 68, 69. And there's little things like that that feel subtly appropriate. Like Tarnis does talk about how in certain planetary alignments occur, they tend to happen in a notably more often where we are on a voyage to that planet when a major alignment happens with that planet. Even like recently, our first images of Pluto occurred during this major Uranus-Pluto square. That was our first time really seeing what Pluto looked like. I think that was in like 2015, right around there.
Yeah. Photography got better.
What?
The photography got a lot clearer.
Yeah.
You know, rather than being a blurry
Oh, yeah.
ball in the sky, they were able to send back from passing spacecraft. I forget which one it was that flew by. Got some really good pictures of Uranus, and it was. I remember they were talking about how there was a heart on the southern part of the planet because there was a rocky outcropping that wasn't covered in ice, showing through basically. That looked like a heart. It was a heart shape. So it was part of that sort of rethinking of what Uranus is, certainly.
Yeah. And I think our first views of Neptune, I think we're at the beginning of the Uranus-Neptune conjunction, the one that happened in the mid-80s, that started in the mid-80s.
Didn't we also, like, regarding the Pluto, like, didn't we also get like pictures of, like, is it Charon? That
That makes sense.
it's like kind of a smaller sister that orbits around Pluto,
I think
and
that,
like a big moon.
Oh, Pluto's moon, you mean?
Yeah,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that showed up for sure.
yeah. So fleshing out the whole kind of Pluto complex a bit on a
Yeah.
visual level by also
Yeah.
seeing its moon. Yeah.
are there some stones we've left unturned from the chapter? Or just going to keep making sure we're not like burning to talk about something else?
I have to run in a couple of minutes, but I was curious. I don't want to, I always feel like I have to go first and then like everyone leaves. So I don't want to like end the conversation early, but
We all
I-
like follow you to the exit. Okay.
I'm curious about the time frame for the next chapter, whether we want to whether we're meeting next week or the following.
If I could chime in first, I think 2 weeks for this one for me would be a lot better. I'm actually going to be traveling next week and then also it's a much longer chapter. I could do
Coming
I could do
weekend
one.
too.
If people want one, I'll do one, but I wouldn't mind two for this next one.
I think my first instinct was two, because the last section of the chapter seems very long.
Yeah,
Catch up that way.
2 weeks is good.
I
2
agree.
weeks.
2 weeks would be better for this chapter, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay,
I go
yeah.
for that.
And it's a deep one, and like intimated, it's gonna have these really interesting comparisons. Now we can take two major alignments, the last two major outer planet alignments, conjunctions of the 20th century. Uranus first with Pluto, and then Uranus moves past Pluto and conjoins Neptune. And he really goes deep into like looking at the ways in which these two eras were sort of similar, but very different.
Wait. I have to go. My dogs have had it.
Okay, maybe this is a sign that this talk is over.
I think Pia should lead the discussion on the 7th
Oh, yeah,
chapter next.
Oh, I
Yeah.
just,
or
it
on the 8th.
grabbed me. It grabbed me. You'll, hopefully
Actually,
it'll grab
next-
you too.
Yeah, next week is Mother's Day anyway, so I think 2 weeks is good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good point.
Bye, gotta go.
All right, bye.
Bye.
See you, Pia.
Thank you.
Bye.
Well, I'll see you all in 2 weeks then. Are we gonna sign
2
off
weeks.
now, or? Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna hop off.
Okay.
Thank you all for
All right,
such a
yeah,
good
good night.
discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was
Right.
very fun.
Yeah,
Yeah,
great
thank
meeting
you.
up with you guys.
See you.
Okay,
in 2
May 15th then?
Yeah.
Yes,
I
that sounds
think,
right.
looking at my calendar.
Yeah.
Sounds like it.
Okay.
Great.
That would
Bye.
be the 15th.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.